The room fell silent before Lady Louise Windsor even opened the velvet case. Camilla had already made her private request, expecting loyalty, discretion, and obedience. But Louise had reached a decision of her own. With Catherine standing only a few feet away, the young royal lifted the sapphire tiara from its resting place, turned away from the Queen, and placed it directly into Kate's hands. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Louise felt every stare as her fingers left the metal. She had entered a private gathering inside Windsor Castle to settle custody of the royal sapphire tiara, a family heirloom held through personal trust rather than passed automatically through rank. That distinction mattered because its custodian protected more than a jewel. She guarded its story, its memory, and the right to decide who would carry that meaning next. Camilla had asked for the tiara days earlier in a recorded private conversation with Louise, with no aides present. She wanted to wear it at an approaching state occasion, believing its place beside the crown would strengthen her image and prove the family had accepted her authority. The Queen Consort expected a quiet agreement. Instead, she watched the younger woman close the empty velvet case with trembling hands. Catherine did not move at first. She understood that accepting the piece would never be seen as a simple gift. It would look like a transfer of trust from one generation to another, perhaps even a judgment on the woman standing across from her. Kate whispered that Louise should think again, but the young royal refused. She declared that the future queen should become the tiara's next custodian because she had protected duty without using it to silence others. Camilla remained still. Her face tightened, yet she did not protest. She watched Catherine touch the sapphire centerpiece, then quietly asked whether King Charles had approved the decision. Louise answered that the monarch's permission was not required. A private family condition, meaning a binding instruction attached to the heirloom's custody, gave the current holder the right to choose the next woman who would guard its meaning. The Queen turned toward the door without touching the case. Louise exhaled only after she had gone, but Catherine noticed something beneath the cushion. A folded note had been hidden there, marked in the unmistakable handwriting of Prince Philip, and that discovery would change everything next. But before Catherine could understand why Philip's name had been hidden beneath the sapphires, she first had to understand what Louise had risked by saying no to the Queen. To the public, it appeared to be a disagreement over jewels. Inside the family, it was something far more dangerous. For Camilla, the tiara represented acceptance she believed she had finally earned. For Catherine, it carried the burden of a future she could never escape. And for Lady Louise, the decision became a test of whether family loyalty meant obeying power or protecting a promise made before that power existed. Louise had never been raised to fight for influence. Prince Edward and Sophie had taught their daughter that royal duty meant serving quietly, keeping promises, and never confusing attention with importance. Her father had protected her from the fiercest pressures of palace life, while her mother had shown her how loyalty could remain strong without becoming blind. That upbringing mattered now, because the young royal had suddenly found herself at the heart of a constitutional struggle, a conflict involving the customs, authority, and future direction of the crown. Catherine carried a different burden. As the future queen, meaning the woman expected to serve beside the next king, she had to remain loyal to Charles while preparing for the reign that would follow him. Kate knew every choice she made could either protect the family's emotional legacy or deepen an existing wound. She looked at Louise and quietly said the tiara could still be returned. The younger woman shook her head. Giving it back now, she answered, would turn the promise behind it into something that power could erase whenever it became inconvenient. Camilla sat alone after leaving the room. She removed her gloves one finger at a time, then admitted to a trusted aide in a recorded private conversation that the refusal felt like a judgment on her entire place within the family. The Queen Consort had not merely asked to borrow the sapphire piece for one evening, she had requested that it be reassigned to the Queen's permanent ceremonial collection, the official group of jewels reserved for repeated use by the reigning queen. That transfer would have made her control lasting. Louise understood the danger. Once the tiara entered that collection, No future custodian could decide where it belonged or who should inherit its meaning. Catherine would receive a symbol, but the family would lose the freedom Prince Philip had deliberately protected. Kate finally realized that the handover had not been an emotional impulse. It had been a defense of the late Duke's written intention. Sophie entered without speaking. She saw the empty velvet case, looked at her daughter's pale face, and immediately understood what Louise had done. The trusted confidant pulled a chair beside her, but offered neither praise nor warning. Her silence carried both pride and fear. Catherine unfolded Philip's note at last. The first line referred to an earlier ceremony, a private promise, and the moment Camilla had chosen not to keep it. The late Duke had remembered everything. The refusal had not begun with Louise's courage that morning. It had begun months earlier, during one ceremony that quietly changed how she saw Camilla forever. Every royal rupture has a moment that appears insignificant until history looks back. For Lady Louise, that moment came during a private remembrance ceremony at St. George's Chapel. There were no raised voices and no public humiliation. There was only an empty chair, a sapphire brooch left unworn, and one promise Camilla had made to Sophie, then abandoned when palace advisors warned that keeping it might weaken her authority. Louise had been chosen to carry a small sapphire brooch linked to Prince Philip's carriage-driving legacy, a deeply personal part of his life that had shaped their bond. The ceremony at St. George's Chapel, the royal church inside Windsor Castle, used for family services and burials, was meant to honor his descendants rather than reinforce the present court's order. Sophie had secured that promise directly from Camilla during a documented private meeting 2 days earlier. The Queen had agreed that the family would come before rank. Everything changed minutes before the service. Camilla received a final briefing from palace advisors, who warned that placing Louise near the front would draw attention away from the Queen's authority. She made the decision herself. The young royal was removed from the first family position and replaced by a senior royal representative, an official figure chosen to reflect status rather than personal connection. The order was delivered quietly, but the wound was immediate. Louise stood behind a closed chapel door, holding the sapphire brooch in both hands, while the procession began without her. She heard the footsteps move away and fought back tears in front of Prince Edward. Her father said nothing at first. He simply remained beside her as she stared at the empty chair that had been reserved, then taken away. That silence stayed with her longer than any public insult could have. Sophie confronted Camilla after the service in a recorded private conversation with no courtiers present. She asked why a promise made in confidence had been broken within 48 hours. The Queen replied that the monarchy could not be governed by sentiment. Her answer did more than defend one decision. It told Louise that affection, memory, and loyalty could be pushed aside whenever authority felt threatened. Catherine read Prince Philip's note twice. The late Duke had anticipated a future conflict between rank and character, and he had placed the Sapphire Tiara under Louise's eventual custodianship because he trusted her to know the difference. He warned that the jewel must never be used to manufacture acceptance or erase an earlier act of disloyalty. Kate lowered the page onto the table and looked directly at Louise. The meaning was now unmistakable. Before either woman could speak, Camilla requested an immediate private meeting and demanded that Catherine attend as a witness. The broken promise had explained Louise's decision, but now the woman she had refused was coming back to challenge it face to face. Camilla entered without aids, closed the door herself, and placed both hands on the back of an empty chair. She did not ask Catherine to return the tiara. She asked Louise to explain why she had chosen humiliation over discretion. The question struck harder than any royal command. Louise remained seated. Kate stood beside the velvet case, and 3 generations of royal women faced the truth none of them could soften. The closed room changed everything. No secretaries, lawyers, or courtiers were present to soften the language or hide the damage behind palace procedure. Camilla said the sapphire tiara belonged beside the Queen at a moment when the monarchy was already under pressure. Continuity, meaning the public sense that the crown remained stable from one reign to the next, depended on symbols people could recognize. She argued that wearing the jewel would strengthen confidence, not satisfy pride. Louise looked at her without lowering her eyes. She answered that continuity, built on a broken promise, was merely silence, dressed as duty. The words landed hard. The queen consort's fingers tightened against the chair, and her composure visibly changed. She reminded the younger woman that royal decisions sometimes demanded sacrifice. Louise replied that sacrifice meant giving up something of your own, not taking away something entrusted to someone else. Catherine stepped forward before the anger could deepen. She admitted that she had never asked for the jewel, and did not want her acceptance to become another wound inside the family. Kate said the tiara could still remain unworn while they found another path. Camilla turned toward the velvet case and asked her directly whether she would refuse it. The future queen placed one hand over the lid. She hesitated, then answered with quiet force. She would not reject the trust Louise had placed in her, simply because accepting it made the room uncomfortable. Her choice was not against Camilla. It was for the promise now resting between them. Louise produced Prince Philip's note and laid it on the table. She explained that moving the tiara into the permanent queen's collection would violate its private custodial condition, a written rule allowing one trusted holder to choose the next. Camilla did not deny knowing that condition existed. Instead, she admitted that she believed her status gave her the right to ask Charles to remove it. Louise stood for the first time. Her hands no longer trembled. She told the queen that royal status was exactly what Philip had designed the condition to resist. The request had failed because rank could not overrule trust. Camilla moved toward the door, then stopped. She said Louise might control the jewel, but Charles still controlled whether Catherine could wear it publicly. Then she left. Louise had won the private confrontation, but the decision would mean nothing unless the king chose whether the crown itself would recognize it. The Sapphire Tiara belonged to the family trust, but its public appearance belonged to the monarch. That distinction placed the entire conflict before King Charles. He could honor Louise's decision and risk humiliating his wife, or block Catherine from wearing the jewel and appear to punish a young woman for defending Philip's wishes. When the file reached his desk, Charles read it alone, and did not call Camilla first. The king understood the division immediately. Louise controlled the private custodianship, meaning she held the right to protect the jewel and choose who would receive it next. He, however, still controlled whether it could appear at an official royal event. That authority mattered because public ceremonies did more than display jewels. They revealed which choices the crown was prepared to recognize before the country. William received the news through a documented palace briefing and said almost nothing. The prince knew that pressing his father would create a second conflict. Any demand from the future king could be framed as an attempt to force the next reign upon the current one. Catherine's acceptance already carried enough weight. He chose silence, not because he lacked an opinion, but because he understood how quickly support could become pressure. Charles remained in his private study with Prince Philip's note open before him. He read the warning once, then again. The monarch removed his glasses and placed them beside the page without speaking for several minutes. Loyalty pulled him toward Camilla. Duty pulled him toward Louise. The hardest truth sat between both. His wife's request had tried to override a promise made to his niece. Camilla entered after receiving his summons. She asked whether he truly believed Louise had intended to embarrass her. The queen consort wanted the question answered because humiliation could be condemned. Distrust could not be dismissed so easily. Charles replied that intention mattered less than why the younger woman no longer believed her promise would be protected. A palace advisor joined them and confirmed the consequence in a recorded briefing. Blocking Catherine from wearing the tiara would not reverse the handover. It would only expose a visible conflict between the king and Philip's written wishes. The advisor then revealed that the jewel had already been listed for Kate's appearance at an upcoming diplomatic reception, an official gathering where the royal family receives foreign representatives. Camilla placed the reception schedule on Charles's desk and asked him to remove the entry. He picked up his pen. For one long moment, the monarch held it above Catherine's name. Then he placed it down without making a mark. The queen understood the decision. Charles would not block the tiara. She left the study calmly, but within the hour she issued an order of her own, one that stunned the household before the reception could even begin. The king's silence had protected Louise's choice, but Camilla was no longer waiting for permission to answer it. Camilla's answer arrived not through a statement, but through an absence. Hours after Charles declined to remove the sapphire tiara from Catherine's appearance, the queen withdrew from the diplomatic reception. The official explanation referred to fatigue. Inside the palace, no one misunderstood. She had chosen not to stand beside Kate while the disputed jewel rested above her head, and that decision transformed a private family fracture into an unavoidable royal crisis. Palace staff moved quickly. They revised the reception order, the formal sequence deciding where each royal stood and when each person entered, because Camilla's absence left a gap no one could hide. Catherine was pushed into a more prominent ceremonial position, and that change mattered, because every camera would now frame her as the woman stepping forward, while the queen remained behind closed doors. William understood the danger immediately. He knew his wife's appearance would no longer be seen as simple custodianship. The future king feared it would become a replacement image, one suggesting that Kate had gained what Camilla had lost. He told Catherine in a private conversation that she could still refuse the appearance, but she answered that retreat would turn Louise's trust into another casualty of palace pressure. Catherine stood still as the tiara was secured. Then she asked everyone except Louise to leave. Kate admitted that the jewel now felt heavier than any crown, because it carried another woman's humiliation. The younger royal lowered her eyes and confessed that she had never wanted Camilla excluded. She had only wanted to stop the sapphire piece from entering the permanent queen's collection, where no future custodian could control its meaning. Camilla sat in her private rooms already dressed for the reception. She removed one earring and told her dresser in a recorded conversation that she could not enter a room where her rejection would be celebrated as Catherine's victory. The queen consort did not sound angry. She sounded defeated, and that quiet pain made the decision more dangerous than any public protest. Charles sent her a handwritten message asking her to reconsider. The king reminded his wife that absence would speak louder than the tiara itself. She read the note, folded it once, and placed it beside her untouched gloves without answering. Louise discovered something as she adjusted the final clasp. Prince Philip's note contained a second folded page, addressed to the woman she would eventually choose. Catherine opened it, read the first lines, and immediately closed it again. The message was not about defeating Camilla. It contained a request that only Kate and Louise could fulfill together. Louise told her that wearing the tiara must not become an act against the queen. It had to be a promise that what happened at St. George's would never be repeated. Catherine nodded, then asked her to meet privately after the reception. The public would soon see the sapphire tiara on Catherine, but its true meaning would be decided later, when Kate and Louise met with no crown between them. After the reception ended, Catherine did not return the tiara to the royal vault. She carried it herself into a small private room, where Louise was waiting alone. No aides recorded the conversation. No advisor shaped their words. Kate placed the jewel between them and unfolded Philip's second page. What followed was not another battle over Camilla. It was a decision about what kind of monarchy they wanted to protect. Catherine knew the reception had changed the meaning of the handover. Her appearance in the sapphire tiara had been received as a powerful sign of her future role, and that reaction placed a heavier burden on every choice she made next. The royal vault, meaning the secure collection where important crown jewels are stored, could hold the piece safely. It could not protect the promise attached to it. Louise still looked uncertain. She had defended Philip's instructions, but the memory of St. George's remained inside her decision. Kate asked the question directly. Would the younger woman still have chosen her if Camilla had never broken that promise at the chapel? Louise did not answer at once. Then she admitted the truth. Anger had influenced the timing, but it had not created the choice. Philip's written instructions had guided her long before the ceremony, and Catherine's conduct had done the rest. The future queen had carried duty without demanding obedience, and that difference mattered more than rank. Kate lowered her voice. She confessed that wearing the jewel while Camilla remained alone had not felt like victory. It had felt like proof of how quickly symbols could turn women against one another. Catherine said she would not allow the tiara to become a weapon, even if the public already wanted to treat it as one. Philip's second page settled the question. In the documented note, he asked the chosen custodian to prevent the jewel from becoming the permanent property of any queen, including Catherine herself. The late Duke instructed that it should pass through acts of trust rather than automatic succession, the normal transfer of position from one royal generation to the next. Character, he wrote, must repeatedly earn what rank could never guarantee. Catherine removed the tiara and placed it back into Louise's hands for several seconds. She promised to accept temporary custodianship, but she would never absorb the sapphire piece into her future queen's collection. Kate would protect it, wear it when its meaning required, and return the final decision to trust rather than title. Louise placed the jewel inside the case. Catherine rested her hand on the lid, and together they closed it. Their shared decision was sent to the palace in a written account, just as the first images from the reception began dominating the nation. What began as a refusal inside Windsor was now becoming a public symbol, and the country was about to decide what it believed that symbol meant. By morning, the sapphire tiara was no longer merely a royal jewel. It had become the image on every front page, the subject of every broadcast, and the symbol through which Britain judged three women. Catherine's calm expression drew admiration. Louise's decision inspired fascination. Camilla's absence created a storm. Yet behind the headlines, the most important reaction came from the woman who saw the photograph alone. Newspapers framed the moment as a generational transfer of trust. Palace correspondents debated whether Catherine's appearance marked a rise in her authority or simply reflected Louise's private choice. That distinction mattered because public opinion could turn one family decision into a judgment on the entire monarchy. The palace answered with a carefully worded statement confirming that Kate had been chosen as temporary custodian under Prince Philip's family instructions, meaning she would protect the jewel without owning it permanently. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace before noon. Large screens replayed Catherine entering the reception beneath the sapphires, and one woman lifted a handwritten sign that read, "Trust is given, not taken." The words spread quickly because they captured what many believed the dispute had become. This was no longer about who wore the tiara. It was about whether rank could demand loyalty without earning it. A national broadcaster opened its evening coverage with a still image of Kate and the caption, "The jewel that chose its future." The phrase carried power, but it also sharpened the wound. Louise watched beside Sophie, as commentators described her as a rebel trying to weaken Camilla. The younger woman became visibly distressed. She had defended Philip's wishes, yet the public story now made her look like an enemy of the Queen. Sophie reached for her daughter's hand and reminded her that truth often became simpler when strangers repeated it. Louise answered that simplicity was exactly what frightened her. The trusted confidant understood. Her child had made one careful decision, and the world had turned it into a battle for the crown. Camilla read the front page alone. Catherine appeared beneath the headline, "A New Royal Custodian." The Queen Consort studied the image, then turned the newspaper face down. There was no anger in the gesture, only exhaustion. She finally saw that her private request had become public evidence of how deeply she feared being left outside the family's trust. Charles approved the palace explanation in a documented private briefing, including the clause preventing the tiara from becoming the permanent possession of any current or future queen. William then called Louise personally. The prince thanked her, not for choosing Catherine, but for trusting the family enough to make an honest decision despite its cost. Camilla made one final request. She wanted to meet Louise again, not to reclaim the jewel, but to confront what her own actions had revealed. The nation had already chosen its symbol, but the emotional verdict still depended on whether Camilla could face Louise without demanding anything in return. Camilla returned to the same Windsor room where Louise had refused her. This time, she arrived without a request, without a schedule, and without any claim to the sapphire tiara. Catherine was present, but the velvet case remained closed. The queen looked at Louise and acknowledged what rank had prevented her from seeing. She had treated trust as something the crown could summon, when it could only be earned. Charles had already formally recognized Catherine's temporary custodianship and approved Prince Philip's condition, protecting the jewel from permanent royal ownership. The private family archive, a secure record of personal royal decisions that do not form part of public constitutional law, would preserve that arrangement. This mattered because the handover had never transferred power within the monarchy. It had delivered an emotional judgment about stewardship, who could protect a legacy without turning it into property. Camilla faced Louise and spoke without defense. In a documented private conversation witnessed by Catherine, she admitted that withdrawing from the diplomatic reception had been an act of wounded pride. Her absence had placed Kate in an unfair position, forcing the future queen to carry both the tiara and the blame for a conflict she had not created. The queen consort said she regretted allowing private pain to become a public message. Louise answered with equal honesty. The chapel incident had wounded her deeply, and the memory of standing behind that closed door had sharpened her refusal. Yet she would not use Philip's legacy as a weapon against Camilla. The younger woman wanted the promise protected, not the queen punished. She could release the anger without pretending the betrayal had never happened. Catherine then made her own position clear. Accepting the jewel did not mean replacing Camilla, defeating her, or erasing her service. Kate would safeguard the Sapphire Tiara only until another woman proved worthy of its trust. She would never claim it through title alone. Camilla finally revealed why she had sought permanent control. She feared history would always treat her as temporary, regardless of rank, duty, or years of service. The admission stripped away the argument and exposed the fear beneath it. Louise opened the velvet case. She allowed Camilla to touch the sapphire centerpiece, offering recognition without surrendering custodianship, then gently closed the lid. Charles later recorded the final arrangement. Catherine would hold the tiara, Louise would oversee its future transfer, and no queen could claim it through rank alone. Camilla accepted the decision. Catherine accepted the responsibility. Louise released the anger without regretting her choice. The monarchy's greatest treasures, they now understood, were protected not by crowns or authority, but by the courage to say no when loyalty was mistaken for obedience. And when the Sapphire case finally closed, the family understood the verdict completely. Catherine had received the tiara, Louise had defended Philip's promise, and Camilla had learned that even a queen must earn the trust she cannot command. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.